Konnichiwa. It gives me very great pleasure to welcome you all to our Toda Peace Institute seminar on a new agenda for peace, turning the world away from war. I'm Kevin Clements, the outgoing director of the Toda Peace Institute, and it gives me very great pleasure today to welcome the incoming director of the Toda Peace Institute, Stein Tønnesson. Stein comes with a very distinguished background. He was former head of the Peace Research Institute of Oslo. He is an expert on Southeast Asia and China. And it gives me very great pleasure to welcome Stein to give his opening address on a new agenda for peace.
I feel immensely honored to have been asked to serve as director of the Toda Peace Institute. I would express my gratitude to Daisaku Ikeda, who founded the Institute, as well as to Kevin Clements and other later directors. Under Kevin Clements' leadership, who is now a distinguished fellow of the Institute, he has initiated activities, meetings, and networks with great significance for peacemaking. With assistance from eminently qualified senior fellows, you have many of them assembled over here, in many parts of the world, and from a highly competent administration in Tokyo, Kevin has prepared us for dealing with a worrisome global situation where wars, injustices, and repression spread fear, misery, and death. Peace is a disputed and controversial term. The peace researcher Johan Galtung, who founded my home institution in Oslo, Norway, he separated between two very useful distinction between peace by peaceful means and peace by unpeaceful means. The peace efforts of US President Donald Trump are typical of the second kind. Peace by unpeaceful means. He calls himself the President of Peace and seeks to impose his peace with the use of and threat of war. Let me quote from the Trump administration's national security strategy from November 2025. America is strong and respected again, and because of that, we are making peace all over the world. Peace through strength. Strength is the best deterrent. I'm afraid that Trump's peace will instead provoke the opposite of peace. Small and large wars, chaotic international relations, maybe even the Third World War. Just like many other observers, I have an eerie feeling of global disorder, similar to the one that preceded World War I in Europe. With shifting alliances, territorial disputes, terrorist acts, fragile ceasefires, and illusions that military campaigns can be short and decisive. The long Ukraine war should teach us the opposite, but I'm not confident that the lessons from Putin's miscalculations have been learned. War must be precluded and avoided through patient, systematic, preventive diplomacy. That's on our agenda. In 2025, the Toda Peace Institute's Peace and Security in Northeast Asia program focused on how reassurance may help prevent deterrence from leading to war. The object of deterrence is, of course, to avoid war, but often it leads to the opposite. But if it's combined with reassurance, it may work. To reassure effectively, national leaders should build a reputation for trustworthiness through restraint. They must signal peaceful intentions, be prepared to negotiate agreements, and keep their promises. Reassurance of this kind is preventive diplomacy and can be absolutely essential in a crisis situation. A more advanced preventive diplomacy than just reassurance aims at arms control agreements, where the parties pledge to keep their arsenal of weapons below certain limits and abstain from threatening deployments. Such negotiations were easier during the Cold War, actually, than today. At that time, there were only two antagonistic states with huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons. At present, the US takes no interest in renewing the weapons control agreements with Russia, since Washington sees China as its main adversary. It's sad that the New START treaty ran out on 5th February this year, without any response from the White House to the Kremlin's wish for an extension by 1 more year. As of now, we are left without any global arms control agreements. This is a real travesty. China has much fewer strategic weapons than Russia and the US, but is engaged in a worrisome and consistent and rapid build-up. China has long advocated a no first use policy, though. This is to be appreciated. If all sides could agree on no first use, then we could feel safer that there will be no use at all. I'm happy that Kevin Clements, as Distinguished Fellow, has agreed to take the lead in a new Toda Peace Institute program on managing nuclear risks in Northeast Asia. That deserves an applause. Preventive diplomacy can be carried out by building multinational or transnational frameworks for leaders and specialists to meet under a shared agenda that values peace and cooperation. This is why I appreciate the work that is done for the Toda Peace Institute by Keith Krause and Kai He, sitting over here. Keith Krause faces a crisis around Europe with war in Ukraine, trade war with the US disengagement from NATO, huge investments in arms production, challenges from extremist parties, and weak leadership in many countries. Keith Krause looks beyond the present troubles and intends to initiate discussion about the possibility to build collective security when the war in Ukraine is over. This is an alternative to bipolar bloc building. While the European collective security system is not on the cards for now, peace activists and researchers should keep it alive as a goal and vision and discuss scenarios for how to achieve it. Kai He of Griffith University in Australia takes a similar approach to the Asia-Pacific, concentrating on existing security architectures with multiple alliances, partnerships, and regional frameworks operating in parallel, and making East Asia differ from Europe. Kai and his colleagues may have more grounds for optimism than Keith when it comes to securing regional stability. It is undeniably true that China's economic and military power is growing and that this instills fear among others, not least here in Japan. It is also true that the long-lasting disputes in the Taiwan Strait, over tiny islets in the East China Sea and the South China Sea and on the Korean Peninsula, are not on their way to being resolved. On the other hand, the East Asian countries have navigated their disputes for more than 40 years without going to war against each other. This is actually a great achievement in your region. Europe used to see itself as more peaceful than Asia. Now the opposite is true. Although East Asia still has its share of border incidents, there has not been any confrontation on the scale of law for these 40 years. The Asia-Pacific region has several forums for preventive diplomacy, many of them with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, in a facilitating role. The Toda Peace Institute conducts also extensive research on democracy. Democracies rarely fight each other. This is a solid finding in peace research, yet we don't really know why. I think it has to do with transparency. Much that is held secret in autocracies is discussed openly in democracies. This may reduce the risk of accidental war. Well-established democracies are also apt to manage internal conflicts without resorting to violence. Yet new democracies established when a dictator falls from power are often replaced by a new autocracy in a relatively short time. The Toda Institute's Global Challenges to Democracy program, led by Olivia Stokes-Dreyer, has studied how, after the Arab Spring of 2011-12, many new democracies gave way to authoritarianism in the Middle East and North Africa. The first bunch of country studies from this project have just been published on the Toda website together with a comparative introduction by Professor Larbi Sadiki. Democratic backsliding has not been reserved for the Middle East. Over the last 10-15 years, elected leaders have adopted authoritarian ways in many parts of the world, breaking with long-established laws, rules, and rights. Trump's America is the front page story. Can the world's oldest constitution resist the onslaught from an impatient elderly president who believes neither in law nor division of power, and also not on multilateral cooperation? Donald Trump claims to only follow his personal morality. Will the US courts preserve their independence? Will states run by the Democrats be subject to further interference by armed federal forces? Will the US and the world be further polarized? Social and political polarization is under study in two of the Toda Peace Institute's research programs, Olivia Dreyer's on democracy and Lisa Church on social media. Polarization may be defined as division into two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs. It can be between rich and poor, between elite and people, between government and opposition, between genders or generations. At any rate, many people adopt extremist attitudes and some engage in violence. There is consensus that polarization has been increasing worldwide in the last 2 decades, and that a huge effort is needed to foster civilized debate and dialogue. Social media have played an accelerating role for leaders with populist instincts and great thirst for power to mobilize support. Permanent discursive connection has been established between leaders and digital populations mediated by secret algorithms. This will be discussed today between Olivia Dreyer and Lisa Church. Lisa leads our social media technology and peace-building program. Her key concern is to counter polarization by creating and utilizing technologies with algorithms conducive to thoughtful and fact-based deliberation. The big challenge is to make deliberative technology accessible and engaging for young and old computer-savvy people. The impact of artificial intelligence is now addressed by the United Nations. Secretary General Antonio Guterres is setting up an independent entity with a mandate to explain what's really happening in the world of big tech and explore to what extent it undermines human values. As Guterres openly concedes, the United Nations does not have the power to regulate artificial intelligence. In a moment, I will sit down with Kevin and discuss the role of the United Nations inter alia. Cooperation on halting and mitigating climate change requires peaceful action by people, societies, and states. This is the topic of the final dialogue on today's agenda between Janani Vivekananda, who leads our program on climate change and conflict, and the cultural geographer Carol Farbotko, who has studied how people in the Pacific Islands engage with drastic changes imposed by global warming, including the prospect and effects of displacement. A book volume study edited by Professor Upolu Lumavai in Suva, Fiji, will soon be published around this topic. Climate change may lead conflicts to turn violent. Climate change may also lead people to cooperate. What is sure is that arms races and armed conflicts are bad for the climate. Resources that could be used in climate action are instead used for military purpose. Look at how Russia's war in Ukraine has brought the Kremlin to cancel its environmental protection policies almost completely. We have called this seminar a new agenda for peace, turning the world away from war. A reformed United Nations should remain the cornerstone in the global architecture of peaceful cooperation. Today, it faces financial collapse due in great part to a loss of US funding and participation. UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali launched in 1992 an agenda for peace, after the Cold War had ended, with emphasis on preventive diplomacy, peacemaking and peacekeeping. And for a long time it looked successful. We need to renew our efforts to stop the fighting in Ukraine and other places and save the UN from ruin, and make also possible effort to renew the agenda, as Secretary Guterres tried in 2023 with his new agenda for peace. So we consciously chose here to follow the UN terminology. 2026 is already shaping up to be a year of constant surprises and chaos. The law of power is prevailing over the power of law. Here I'm quoting Guterres. I'll end by saying something about what I see as Japan's special role. Since the end of the Second World War, Japan has stood out for me and my family and my compatriots on the other side of the Eurasian continent as a nation of peace, with its famous Article 9, I quote, "Aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order, the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. Land, sea and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized." This stands out for me as something very special, where I don't know other nations with similar articles. When I was 11 years old, I read a 3-volume history of Japan, ending with the emperor's decision to surrender on 15th August. My brothers and I discovered recently that 3 months earlier, on 8th May 1945, when the German occupation forces in Norway surrendered, our Norwegian father, who later became an expert on the French Revolution, confided to his diary, which we found among his belongings, that he was determined to volunteer for the fight against Japanese militarism. He didn't, but he had that intention. I've read books and seen films about the history of Japanese military expansionism in the years 1931 to 45. Yet my image of Japan in my lifetime is colored by its democratic constitution and notably Article 9. I see Japan as a nation of peace, and this vision is linked to my impression of Buddhism with patience, meditation, harmony and peace. This image of Japan has been reinforced also by my visits to Hiroshima and to the Sokagakai in different places in Japan. I will make another visit later in March, and by the Nobel Peace Prize to Nihon Hindankyo in 2025, 80 years after the nuclear holocaust. Let me end this welcoming address by expressing a hope that Japan will stand by its peace constitution, never acquire its own nuclear weapons, and engage in the fight against nuclear proliferation by peaceful means. I thank Japan for hosting the Toda Peace Institute with our emphasis on peace by peaceful means. Thank you.